of this board, and Leo Santuaso served this board for 6 years, and he and his knowledge will be greatly missed, although we're probably still going to call on him after this. To take Leo's place on the board, I would like to welcome Jack Farrell, who's sitting on the end here, and as the newest member for the Planning and Zoning Board. Jack, would you please introduce yourself and tell the board a little bit about the knowledge and experience that you bring to the board?
I don't know about knowledge and experience. Yeah, I'm Jack Farrell. My family and I have lived here off and on for 60 years or so. So I'm very, very familiar with the background of Pinehurst, all the various ins and outs and what's happened. I've been here 10 years after retirement, moved back down 10 years ago, and have been actively involved in the community and various functions, including Historic Preservation Commission and the Commission Rewrite Board, along with being on council for a year, filling in for John Cashin, who had to step off because of his medical condition. So I was actively involved, more or less, from the peanut gallery in the rewrite of the PDO in the 2012-2013 timeframe. So I'm fairly familiar with some of the terms and conditions and the reason they're there. So in addition, serving on the council with the comprehensive plan, I think, gave you a tremendous insight into the various departments and what the community is looking for as far as land use and zoning and so forth. So it may be of some value as we go forward.
Thank you, Jack. Now for roll call, I would like each of the board members to introduce themselves with their name for roll call, and then tell Jack a little bit of something about yourselves, your work experience and knowledge, so he can get to know us. And how about we start with Sonia and Julia, so we don't forget you guys. Who would like to go first?
I'll go first.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Sonia Rothstein. I originally lived in Pinehurst in the 60s and moved back here for retirement with my husband and daughter. And I was active in Fayetteville on the planning board. That was a joint planning board for the city and county for 9 years. And I'm hoping that I can add something to this board. And this is my second year starting on the board.
Thank you, Sonia. Julia?
Hi, Julia Latham. By trade, I'm an environmental attorney. Started coming to Pinehurst in 2001 as a vacation home. We moved here in a real sort of permanent way 13 years ago. I've been on the Planning and Zoning Board for 4 years and am the chair of the Board of Adjustment.
Thank you, Julia. David, you want to go next?
I'm David Alzamora. I'm an attorney focusing primarily on real estate closings. My family moved here in 1995. I was the ripe old age of about 6 years old then. So lived here pretty much my whole life. Just turned 31 this past year. My wife and I moved back to the area this past October. And this is my first year serving on the board. So looking forward to the remainder.
Thank you, David. And you forgot to mention you have a 2-month-old at home.
Yeah, we have a 2-month-old at home, so I forgot what sleep actually feels like. So bear with me if I'm a little slow and forgetful. So.
Thank you, David. Joel?
Joel Schreiberg, originally from Boston, been here for a long time, a while. I like to believe that what I brought to the board over the last 9 years is the desire and ability to listen to the people in the audience and try and act and react to whatever is before us and how it impacts their lives living here. If the one thing that has always intrigued me about this community, it's the civility of its citizens, and I dread the day when that goes away, but I don't think it will anytime soon. Thank you for allowing me to serve for 9 years.
Thank you, Joel. Jeremy?
Jack, welcome. I'm Jeremy Hooper. I've lived in Pinehurst. I want to, for 2 different tours of Pinehurst since 2003. I spent 5 years in Augusta, Georgia. I've been in some sort of construction capacity, mostly sales, for, golly, if I had to do the math, 20-some years. So I'm not sure how that experience helps or hurts the board, but I've been on the board for a little over 2 years, and that seems odd enough for me to say because it seems like yesterday. But I feel that even though I've been here for 2 years, I feel like I can learn something from you, so I'm honored that you're here. Good to meet you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Philip?
Yeah, Philip Shoemaker. I'm originally from Washington, D.C., Maryland area. I moved back here in 2013 after being in the Air Force. Day job, I'm with the Economic Development Partnership with the state of North Carolina. We rolled out of the Department of Commerce about 5-6 years ago. Private nonprofit that contracts back to the state. That's my day job. My night job is managing and building family property, commercial properties that we own in the area throughout this county and Montgomery County and also up in Maryland.
Thank you. So we do have 8 members present tonight, so we have a quorum and are able to conduct business. Alex Cameron and Darren Birch are going to be our staff liaisons tonight, and we will follow the agenda as written. So first item on the agenda is to approve the minutes for 2 meetings. So let's start with the regular meeting minutes for November 5th. Does anyone have any questions or corrections to these minutes? All right, then can we have a motion to approve the minutes? You have to say it. As written?
I'll make a motion that the minutes are approved as written.
Second.
Okay, Sonia has put the motion out to approve the minutes, and Philip has seconded the motion, or Jeremy has seconded the motion. Sorry, I can't hear through these masks. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. So then, are there any questions or corrections for the minutes for the November 12th special meeting? No? Then can we have a motion to approve the minutes for November 12th?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes of the special meeting on November 12th.
Second.
All right, Jeremy has put out the motion, and Philip has seconded it. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. So the November 12th and the November 5th minutes are approved as written. The next item on the agenda is general business and board organization. So since I've taken on this new role, and I appreciate your patience tonight, I've been reading a lot of books and how to run meetings and what the meetings should be like. And all of you should have sort of this off-white piece of paper. And it outlines what I think would be a good way to manage the public hearings. And so I would like all of you to just kind of look at it. Basically, we would have a fact-finding portion after we open the public meeting. So we'd have a staff report, then the applicant presentation, and then public comments. And we'll let the public make all of their comments before we have any response. And then the staff and the applicant can respond to all of the questions and comments that the public presents. And then after that, each board member will have an opportunity to ask questions, express concerns, and support of the request. And then after that, we will close the meeting. So that should give us time to talk to the public without having to open and close meetings. And then we can, after the meeting is closed, we can deliberate and then vote on the proposal. And just some little comments about behavior. So if you'll just look it over, and if you have any suggestions or concerns, just email me, and we'll move forward with it. We won't take time today to discuss it. Okay? Any questions? So the second item,
Cindy, I'm sorry.
yes?
I have a question. I know in the past we have talked about limiting the amount of time an applicant and the other side can have.
Yes?
And I have checked with other cities and towns and smaller municipalities like ours, and they all agree, including the Institute of Government, that it's a good idea to limit, whether we say 15 minutes for each side, then it can have a rebuttal. But I think it's not fair for the audience when we have, like we've had in the past, a case that takes up an hour with their presentation, basically, and the opposition is sitting there very patiently, and then we run out of time, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that should be addressed somewhere.
Are you talking about the applicant speaking or the public speakers?
Both,
Both?
correct.
So under public comments, the fourth item is speakers should limit their comments to 3 minutes. Group spokespersons will be given extra time to speak if needed. So it is addressed under the public comments, but I did not put a time limit on the applicant. That really hasn't been a problem, I don't think, in the past, but we can do that on an individual basis, is my thought.
Yeah, I think it has been a problem in the past. With the zoning, I remember on Midland Road. Do you remember that one?
I'm sorry.
Where the owners came and that took up forever. I'm just trying to avoid something in the future if we're looking at this and trying to be mindful.
I appreciate that, and we'll consider that. And I don't know that it has to be written in there as much as if it's getting out of hand, we can just reel it in during the meeting.
Okay,
Anybody else?
great.
Have any-
What we could do is, ahead of the meeting, we could tell the applicant that they have 10 minutes to make a presentation. Any time after that would have to be granted by the board, or just try and keep your comments to 5 to 10 minutes, something like that.
Okay.
Most of the applications that come in should be able to accomplish that in 5 to 10 minutes. I say most.
I think Sonia has a good point, though. I have sat through presentations from applicants that went on and on and on, and they were redundant. But I would look to the chair to reel in an application or an applicant if they're getting off track or being redundant. I think that's probably, rather than assign an arbitrary number or time to them.
Yeah, and keeping in mind what applications this board will hear, you could be hearing anything currently from a major subdivision. It could be a 5-lot subdivision, or it could be a 150-lot subdivision. You could be hearing rezonings, or hopefully soon a text amendment, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. So it would be hard to arbitrarily grab a number that would fit across the board. So I do think within your rules of procedure, and I know staff is working diligently on getting some draft language updated to bring to the board, it can give the chair that authority, and the board can look to the chair to exercise that power if it seems to be a rambling on, or to the points that raised, if it's redundant material. And the same for public comment. If we're hearing the same thing over and over, we can just, when we see it, show of hands who all feel this way.
Feel comfortable with that, Sonia?
That's perfect, as long as we've got it addressed ahead of time, perfect. Thank you.
I'd comment that I think if the public understands that there's a 3-minute limit, but still the chair has the opportunity to not actually call that if they think what they're saying is germane, that makes a big difference. But I think when we have an open-ended time limit for anybody, we've all seen this go on to a point that, I'm beginning to go to sleep up here. So I think having the number in there is important, and I think Cindy realizing she can let it go on if she wants to, or the chair can let it go on, is an important part of this.
All right. But those, if anyone have any other comments that they want to, as you read through it, you may have some other opinions that you want included, and please, forward them on to me. This is like our first draft, so it's not cast in stone. Okay, Joel?
I've just noticed over the years that to me, it's always been important, but I think we've left it out any number of times, that people understand what P&Z does and what we don't do. I mean, you come before us with a set with an application that conforms with the PDO, you get to do it. And we're not here to make judgments about whether there ought to be, a greenhouse or a right house or whatever. And I think the more that the village can do to educate people prior to the meeting, whether it's a sheet that explains exactly what powers we have and don't have, will eliminate a lot of the controversy and disappointment of people who show up here.
Well, a lot of these address the standards and the presentation, the proposal, application, things that are official documents of it. So hopefully that'll help people narrow their opinions to what's pertinent to a decision. But we'll see. We'll just try it. Okay, anything else? All right. So our...
Good job.
Thank you. Our next item is to elect a board member to serve as the first vice chair. Since I moved into the chair position, that vacated the first chair. Julia is our second chair, and she does not want to move up to the first chair. So I can tell you that Joel has the most experience, 9 years experience on the board. And then Jeremy and Paul have both been here for about 2 years. And Sonia and Philip 1 year, and then David and Jack are our newest members. So basically the job would be to fill in as the chair if I can't be at a meeting. And then, we may be heading up some subcommittees and things like that. So I would leave it up to you to decide who you want to be in that position. I kind of think Joel would be a good choice because of all the experience he's had, but I am open to anybody being in the vice chair. I'll be happy to work with any of you. So I will, does anybody have any comments or?
Have you asked Joel if he's interested?
Yes.
Then I'll make a motion to give Joel first chair.
Second.
All right, any discussion? We have a motion by Sonia.
As long as when he was asked if he was interested, he said yes.
Yeah, that's what I was looking at his face when I was seconding it, for sure.
Well, let's ask Joel.
Does this carry with it a large increase in salary?
Absolutely, 1,000 times 0.
I like the multiplication, thank you.
Okay, so now that that question is answered, are there any other questions? No? All right, we have a motion by Sonia. We have a second by Philip, by Jeremy. Who seconded it?
I did.
Jeremy, I'm sorry.
No worries. No worries.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Congratulations, Joel. You're the first vice chair. All right, and then the other item, there was a strategic planning meeting this week, and I had an opportunity to talk to the mayor, and he is very interested in the council having a joint meeting with the Planning and Zoning Board. Just get to know each other, give them an opportunity to tell you what they see our role is in their goals and objectives, and give you an opportunity to ask questions. So this is just an FYI that this will probably be coming up in January. No time, no date has been set. But just to, think about questions you might have or things that you would like to know or bring to that meeting. Okay? Anything else? Alex or Darren, would you like to add anything to that discussion? All right. So the next item on the agenda is to discuss potential draft language for tree preservation and landscaping standards. So I'll turn it over to Alex and Darren.
All right, guys. We left this all from the special meeting of November 12th to solicit some more feedback from the board. Thank you to most of you who have provided us some pretty valuable feedback, and we have been able to incorporate a good deal of that. We've kind of incorporated a little bit more as early as maybe in the past hour. So what we would like for this discussion to do is we've kind of compiled a staff memo that Kathy worked on that's handed out to you guys and been emailed to Sonia and Julia. And what this does is it kind of highlights some of what staff has felt to be the more material feedback that we've received from various board members and what staff would like to have arrive at a consensus from the board on, so we know that we can, which direction we know to move forward with updating the draft language so that we can make that next step ready for public hearing. So with that, since it's Kathy's memo, I'm going to let Kathy kind of run down some of these bullet points that she's kind of addressed here, and then we can kind of discuss each one separately if need be. That way we can, again, kind of arrive at a consensus from the larger group.
Okay, and I would just mention that there were more comments that were received even after I drafted this memo, so it still may not reflect everything that we've discussed. One of the items that came up, and when I put this in, I couldn't remember if it was a staff item or a board item, but the question was, should small trees be an option and not just the taller trees that are the objective when we first started working on this? And we did find a way to incorporate that because under power lines and other limiting factors, you need to have some flexibility in terms of what you can plant. So we'll talk about a change there. I think one comment that a lot of people had was about the spacing in front yards. They felt that 1 to 15 was close. Maybe we needed to look more at 1 to 20. And so in the draft language, I've provided some either-or language so you can kind of pick what you think collectively is the best choice. We also increase flexibility in terms of where things can be planted. So you may want to stick with the 1 to 15 with an increase in flexibility. So I think as you get into the language a little bit, that'll give you something to chew on while you're making that choice. One question came up regarding violations, if we could hold a permit because of violations of the ordinance. The answer to that is no. Chapter 160D, the new planning statute, specifically prohibits holding permits. So that's not an option for us in enforcement. Let's see, construction access. I think several people thought it would be good to know about construction access. And we have added that language that whenever someone's coming in for a clearing and grading permit, that they'll identify their construction access on their drawings. And we also noted that if you're going to do something, you know, it's an impact as well as any future driveway would be an impact. So you're going to have to compensate. You either have to keep it or you have to replant it. So it just trips in with the rest of the development activities. The 3-inch caliper tree, I think, may still be something that's a little bit subject to discussion. I think we've had some feedback on availability of stock, and as has been mentioned, it's becoming tough to find some of these trees. So we felt like there were a couple of options here. We could drop back to 2.5 inches, but I also included an option you could consider where the village planner could apply flexibility on the size of the stock to be planted, provided that the intent of the ordinance is satisfied. So that sticks a little bit more flexibility in the village planner's hand, or we can just drop to a smaller size caliper on the tree. We did not try to go down the path of picking different calipers based on different species. There are a lot of trees that could be planted, and all of them are going to have a slightly different requirement. So that was a little tough. We didn't go down that path. We could gather some more information if you would like to do so.
And Kathy, I've just had a discussion with one of our other fellow staff members today on that matter. One thing that we could do is we could keep the 3-inch caliper minimum in the ordinance, but give the village planner that allowance with the draft language Kathy's proposed here. But then we could still put a minimum. Even if we're allowing an allowance, we're going to allow it with knowing that a minimum 2-inch caliper tree will need to be planted.
It would be no smaller than.
And what the information I got, that most of the nurseries, they basically are selling them now in ranges. So there will be like a 3 to 4 inches here, your 1 to 2 inches here. It's not like, here's your 2, here's your 2.5, here's your 3 and 3.5. So we could build that language in there. So we have an understanding, an applicant has an understanding that even if you can't get your hands on a 3-inch, you're going to have to find at least a 2. So if it ends up being 2 1/4, they can still meet it, or 2.75, so we have some sort of a range there.
I think I learned since our last meeting as well is I didn't know that, even a 2-inch pine typically is almost 6 feet, if not a little more. And I was surprised at that. So I thought that you would need at least a larger diameter to hit that height. So.
And the staff member that I was speaking with today said that even a 2-inch caliper pine could even overtake a 3-inch caliper pine if they were planted at the same time with a certain number of years. And that's, the intent is to have some visual screening or buffering at the initial time of planting, but also that it's going to be there for years to come too, and then it has that ability to thrive.
Okay, then the next item we had some comments that people like the 2-to-1 replanting requirement when we had a violation situation. I did include another option. We could stick with the language that we have in there now, or we could go 2 trees planted for each tree removed. I've also included some language on how to judge, if we don't have the ability to judge the size of the tree. I think the assistant village manager made a recommendation, let's make it pretty stringent. So I think it's 3 3-inch trees for every tree that we know that was removed if we don't have any documentation, other documentation to base it on. So if somebody comes in, they don't have a tree survey, they blitzkrieg it, we've got, aerials or we've got photographs that show us we know there were trees there, but we don't know what size it was, then they're going to replant it 3-to-1. So I put something in kind of along that lines just for you to play with. Let's see, we've defined, considering the credit, this is one that you might want to play with the number a little bit. We've recommended a 1-to-1 credit for every tree up to 16 inches, and then for every 4 inches over 16, you would get another tree credit. So if you had a 24-inch tree, then you would get credit for an additional 2 more trees. So it would be a total of 3 trees. So that was one suggestion, but I know the number might need to be 12 inches, over 12 inches. You need to kind of pick what you think is the right number. But we just use 16 to kind of make a point, I guess.
16 inches is a very, very big tree.
It's a big tree, and it's kind of funny. When you look, we've got a couple of examples to go through with you today, but, I'm picking up this one here. There were a lot of 14-inch pines, a lot of 10-inch. There's a 20-inch, so we do have them out there.
Yeah, I know,
But we just have to kind of pick which one we want to give extra credit for, I guess.
a 12-inch tree can be 80 feet tall.
Right, so you may want to choose 12 feet as the number. So I think that's just one just to decide amongst yourselves what you feel most comfortable with. Let's see. Another issue was to define the yards. So we've included a graphic and a definition of what the front, side, and rear yards are for the purposes of trees. Let's see, we looked at grouping when addressing the driveway. And I think we've got, well, we can look at this as we get a little bit further into the language, but we've got a mechanism that I think kind of increases the flexibility. So what we didn't want to wind up with were totally blank areas where you'd have a long run of frontage and nothing in it, and then you'd have a group of a bunch of, 8-inch trees, maybe they're all right here in the corner. So we wanted to maybe come back and put some trees in based on some acceptable spacing, but they wouldn't have to necessarily be, 7.5 or 15 feet apart. I'll just do it that way, or 20 feet apart, depending on what you pick. So that would hopefully give us a little bit more flexibility in how we work with driveways and site triangles and other infrastructure that can get in the way. So we can be a lot more flexible about how we apply that. And then I thought one of the more interesting questions was how many 2-acre parcels are there in Pinehurst? So we ran the number on that one, just using GIS records, so which is not always 100% accurate based on how property is tracked, but it's pretty close. And within the village limits, there are 10,614 parcels that are 2 acres or less in size, and then 756 parcels in the ETJ that are less than that size. And I think the reason that was asked is because in some of the sample codes that we looked at, a lot of jurisdictions don't apply tree preservation standards until you get to 2 acres in size. So any lot smaller than that, it wouldn't apply at all. So if you did that in Pinehurst, it wouldn't be applying to very many lots. So I don't know that you want to go by the standard that's been used in some of the other jurisdictions. So I guess with that, that's kind of a quick summary of what we had in the cover memo. I don't know if you would like to kind of go item by item on the highlighted items in the code. I'll move forward at your discretion.
I wonder, I think you skipped is damage of existing trees by equipment considered removal.
And the answer to that one is yes, it is. Anytime you girdle a tree or damage the root structure, it's considered removal. By definition, it is.
Okay, and then does anyone have any questions about anything? We have one in the audience, Leo.
I'm sorry to butt in. I can't stay for your whole session to review the material that's been distributed today. And I thank Darren for the invitation to come. I got to get up to Carthage for a 5:15 meeting, so forgive me for butting in, but I just want to leave you folks with a couple of comments. February of 2018 was when a small subcommittee was formed to work through this process. When Darren came on a year and a half ago now, this was one of the first things he took up to try and resolve with Kathy and Alex. And I certainly appreciate all the hard work all of you have done to get to this point. And I look forward to seeing this thing get adopted pretty soon. And I know you have a lot of work to do, but this is like a going away present for me, and I'm very appreciative of you taking it up as soon as possible so that we can get it done. I thank you very much, and sorry to butt in.
No apologies. We're glad you did, and thank you for all the hard work you did on this. You initiated
Keep up the good work. You got a lot of it coming.
Thanks, Leo.
Thanks, Leo. Joel?
Third bullet down on the staff report says, can permits be delayed for tree violations? And we discussed at one point, if you cleared the land, just clear cut it, that you couldn't get a permit for 3 to 5 years. Has that gone by the wayside? Okay, so it appears to me that there are no.
Well, he's talking about for forestry. If there's a forestry clearing that takes place, that's still there.
That's still in the proposal. So if it's forest land, if it's forest use, is that it, Kathy?
Right, so if somebody's got, all the necessary state requirements to qualify as a forestry management project, and they have a plan on file, or they meet that criteria that the state set forth, and they go ahead and say they do a clear cutting operation, and then they come in and they want to get a development permit, the village has the option of delaying a development permit for up to 3 years if it's non-willful. But if they did it kind of on purpose, I'm not always sure how you can tell that, then you can go to 5 years. And that's still in there for forestry operations. But for just general, somebody just came in and just cleared, we can't just, if it's not forestry related, we can't just hold permits.
So let's take, I've got a piece of property, and it's 10 acres, and I come here and I get a PUD for this thing, and I go out and clear cut the land. What happens?
You're talking two different scenarios. I think we need to address one. See, if you want to do a planned unit development, so a clearing and grading permit, the way this is currently structured, wouldn't apply because you're going through some other type of plan approval process, which is where it's going to trigger these planning requirements anyway within those individual yards. Now, if you own it and you don't come get an application or not, and you just clear cut it, we can't withhold permits for you. But you could be in violation of the ordinance.
Right.
If this goes through as it's currently drafted.
And we do have the section on the trees removed in violation, so there is a penalty. It's the payback, what is it, the 2-to-1?
One or the three-inch caliber for each one removed, if you can't provide us with the feedback on what you actually remove from the property.
And now I've just got a single lot here, this large plot, and I decide that my builder decides that it's going to be a little cheaper for me to just clear this whole place or most of it, and I don't put any trees back. What happens?
You'll be in violation.
Happens.
So we pursue the normal violation procedure, and it could result into fines adding up of $500 a day.
And then you would still have to replant trees.
What?
You would still have to replant trees.
Say I don't replant them.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Let's assume I don't replant them. What are you going to do to me?
Okay, then it follows the standard violation process for any zoning violation. So, I mean, up to and including court remedies if you have to go that far.
But it's no longer tied to the permitting of the process? I'm sorry, Joe.
You guys are satisfied that there's enough
Keith?
deterrent in here for me to just take these down and do nothing? I mean, it's not like you're not going to issue me my CO, right?
Yeah, because then you wouldn't be in, sorry.
MCOs.
Yeah, you would be violating the ordinance, so no, you would not meet the requirements to get A, your permit, or to B, have it closed out.
So you'd have to come, if you had a vacant lot, you'd come in, if you cleared as part of the permit process to get a permit for a new single family, we're going to, as we do now, we're going to look at a planting plan. So your plan will have to show the trees that are required by, potentially this ordinance. And if you do not have that, we're going to make sure that you include that on a landscape plan. And then at occupancy, if the trees are not planted, we will get, potentially a bond or a letter of credit for the future planting. And we have the potential that we can still hold the full CO, and we can do temporary COs. So we do have some options for some of the scenarios that you mentioned, Joel.
I mean, as long as you guys feel you've got enough penalties in there, if I tell you to go pound sand,
Under the current statutes.
very beginning of this, my question has always been, the cost saving to me may be worth this. I just write your check and I go away. And I want to make sure that, as much as we can, that that's not the situation. 100% in favor of this, but I want to make sure we got some teeth behind it.
We think so. I mean, if we need to up that ratio, we can discuss that, but we think we're good right now.
Socialist.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Sonia.
I kind of agree with Joel. I'm still not quite certain this is going to work. If a builder comes in, it's so much cheaper for them just to mow it all down and then place the 3-inch trees. When we're talking about 3-inch trees, you can get a crepe myrtle, you can get scrub oaks. How are we going to control this? I mean, I'm sorry, but builders try to put in the cheapest they can put in. I mean, you see it on their builder bushes, et cetera, and I'm not knocking builders. I'm just trying to preserve our village. So how are we going to address that? What kind of species? I mean, scrub oaks are cheap. Crepe myrtles aren't that expensive, and you can find crepe myrtles 3 inches easily.
Well, one thing that we can't do is we can't craft an ordinance based on finances or the cost that would be associated with doing that. I think, Sonia, you may bring up a good point. Maybe the board needs to discuss the potential of what species are to be planted. we've discussed that internally as staff, and we've ultimately kind of stayed silent on that. But I guess ultimately, too, what would be better for the overall canopy is that there is a mix. Maybe that there is a situation where development comes in and they have to have all new young plantings, and then, or a mix of new and old. So it wouldn't necessarily be the worst thing. At least we would know that there would be some plantings to be there and that they could be insured to thrive and be there 50, 100 years down the line. But every scenario that we've played out, we feel that this is about as stiff as we can be within our bounds.
I understand about the canopy, because I have a lot that has that, and I have tree people all the time advising, and what they advise is that when you have a big tree, to put a small one near there so that when they age out, you do have a tree, but they don't advise just cutting them down and replacing with new ones.
Go ahead, Jeremy, I'm sorry.
We still have some verbiage in here that talks about what percentage of pine trees would be included in the.
Yes, I don't think we've taken out the 50% was our objective, 50% longleaf.
So we still have a percentage to meet the requirement to be 50% longleaf pines.
And that's something that staff just kind of threw in there. No, I would, and I think that was actually my suggestion.
It was,
I
it's on
think
that
that's
one.
important. You know, certainly, you mentioned at the first, as well as I learned this week, the cost of pine trees possibly is going to increase based upon scarcity. And to Sonny's point, you could buy some crepe myrtles less expensive, and to meet the requirements, you know, we don't want a whole, 25 years from now, we don't want streets lined with just crepe myrtles and the pines are missing. So I think that's an important piece to our verbiage here.
And some of the feedback that we got from staff today too, and is updated in the sections here, we do kind of, under existing tree preservation credits, we give preference to certain species, and we also say preference on the planting schedule for the other section for these type species: longleaf pine, dogwood, American holly, southern magnolia, and eastern red cedar. So we could even broaden that at least half have to be, instead of at least half have to be longleaf pine, half have to be, and then one of these preferred species. Maybe that's a way. Maybe, I don't know what the right mix would be, but we would certainly welcome that feedback.
And we do have language in the appendices of the code already about the tall trees versus the small trees, so we could direct them to the tall tree section of the appendix and say, if you're going to take it out, you have to put it back this percentage of trees from this category. And that would reference something we actually already have. Mm-hmm.
It's going to be near impossible to micromanage this down to the tree and the size and the location and so forth. I think it's a matter of intent. I mean, if you see an ordinance that the intent is obviously to preserve larger trees and to make sure that when you clear a property, you populate it with trees. I mean, the intent is there, so maybe that to me goes some way towards the goal we're trying to reach. I mean, because trying to micromanage it down to every single conceivable option, possibility, tree size, location, and is going to be virtually impossible. And situations, as Joel put up, there'll be developers who want to take them down and then worry about it later. I mean, that's just the way it is. And again, you can't micromanage every situation ahead of time. So I think it's just a matter of a good intent at this point in time makes the most sense.
A lot of those reasons are why it's taken so long for us to get to this point. Unfortunately, though, within our statutory bounds, first is that intent language, Jack, and that is our reason for being and reason for crafting that ordinance. So that is probably the most important. That's the foundation for building up this, but we then have to find a way to craft some sort of objective standards that staff can administer it, so it's not, so we wouldn't be seen or could be argued to be acting in an arbitrary or capricious manner when You know, well, you gave Kathy a break here on these trees, or, you know, you let her put in whatever she wanted to, and you let Sonia put in whatever species she liked, but, you know, you made me do this. So it has been difficult to try to play through every imaginable scenario.
Right.
I know you spend a large amount of time with builders who submit permits today. And do you think that this would increase that time? You trying to figure out the calculations for them, helping them? Is there any?
I think there will be a learning curve for both staff and for applicants, Jeremy. I do. I think, yes, we do spend a lot of what staff does is educate and explain, well, you know, you've submitted this and this is why it doesn't meet our standards. You could look at pursuing this opportunity. I think it's going to take some time for everyone to kind of adjust to this. I think I focus more on the staff side of that without understanding that curve. And I know your suggestion from the last meeting is that we should reach out to some folks that we know routinely submit application to us. And I'm still waiting on a list from you. I'm just
Pull out my phone. But yeah.
The other thing I'd add is, I think we've come up with a relatively straightforward calculation that we can use to come up with the planting requirements. So you look at the yard, you look at what your dimension is in a yard, and it's an easy calculation to do. We've got to make sure that we have a really good illustration that people can follow in the ordinance, and I think we're working on that and crafting that. So I think from a planning standpoint, it's a relatively straightforward calculation. I think where it gets a little bit more complicated is on the credit side. And where are we giving you credits for these trees? And I think we're still crafting, and I think we've come up with some pretty good language on that. But that, allowing for those credits is just another, if any confusion comes in, it'll be how and where do we get those credits. So that's why I think we have to be really clear on it. And I think we're continuing to refine that, and I think we are there, almost there with that language.
Yeah, and so we're going to really rely, and the applicant or the builder or whomever, really going to rely on the surveyor information. Because as Darren said, some of these ratios just kind of came to us one day and thought, is that one of the most clear, objective quantifications that we can make that would actually, on scale, go with each lot as the lots range in different sizes, different. You know, we don't have just straightforward, beautiful square lots in the village too. But so this is something that could apply for pie-shaped lots, for flag lots, et cetera. But you know, in requiring that tree survey, aside from the spacing and location that we still have to work out for the credit, we feel like that might give. The learning curve won't be as steep for folks if we have that surveyor information.
I think you're going to be pulling out your calculator quite a bit on permits with builders there, helping them figure it out. But it was kind of my point to Darren in an email that I finally wrote to him 2 weeks later. Sorry. But, you know, initially, my gut and my heart was, hey, let's make this meaty. You know what I mean? Let's make a right turn and a left turn for every single thing that could happen. And the more I thought about it, you know, one, it makes it more difficult on staff. It makes it more difficult on the person pulling the permit, makes it more confusing. And I don't know if the end result would have been something that's great for our community. And I think that's the difficult part. I think you guys are doing a great job funneling everything together to make kind of our hodgepodge of conversation last time into something. You know, so I'm with that. If there's any way that we can make it simpler but still get our objective done, I think that's important. And really to your survey point, you know, the only thing that I would probably make a little more specific is I wouldn't be afraid to have some survey requirements that maybe got down to even 6 inches or possibly, you know, I would even go less, but possibly even 6 inches worth of trees marked. I think it gives some of that information to you as a planning department to have that conversation with the builder, number one, to help with that calculation. And 6-inch caliper trees are not totally out of bounds for the surveyors to count. So that's the only input I would have there on that survey point. So
I did go back and include a 6-inch caliper under the tree survey that we could go down to 6 inches. That's where they would start because, you know, if they can keep a 6-inch tree and avoid planting a 2 to 3-inch tree, and the 6-inch tree is not presenting a hardship for them, then why not keep the 6-inch tree?
I think it would entice them a little more to keep that. That's really my point there.
Thank you, Jeremy. Joel?
I think this is a wonderful opportunity for the Village of Pinehurst, the council and the staff to promote this to the citizens. And the vast majority of people who live here would be 100% in favor of this. It's the people that are going to be building homes down the road, but they're not here to listen to us right now. And I just think that the PR that can come out of this, because people often don't realize the positives that the village council and the staff are trying to do. And I know I'm trying to think of the road that goes down to number 9 golf course off 211, where they built a bunch of homes and clear cut them. And I got phone calls from people that said, how'd you allow this to happen? And the answer was there was no reason that they couldn't do it. So I think we're going to make a lot of people very happy, but we're only going to make them happy if somehow some PR gets in here so this isn't on the 5th page of the pilot, stuck in with everything else. I think there should be a separate article if we could possibly get, not possibly, if the pilot would write this as to what the village is trying to do to maintain the texture of Pinehurst.
Agreed. I think Alex got front page coverage last time we talked about it.
Say that it hasn't begun yet, but I understand what you're saying, and that's an excellent point. There's education to it, and then there's PR management that needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joel.
Yeah, clarification on the calculation of the linear feet. I mean, an irregular shaped lot is what? I mean, it's anything other than a square, where you use essentially the forwardmost part of the building and the widest part of the lot from that point forward. Is that the idea?
I think the idea is we're using the width of the right-of-way, the lot along the right-of-way. So we're going to get a calculation on that. Which one do you want to pull up?
Let's take a cul-de-sac lot where the actual street frontage is usually no more than the width of the driveway in many cases. I mean, then we just go back to the building and say, what is the widest point between the street and the building? Is that the idea?
It is. So these protected yards, or whatever we've kind of called them at this point, it's going to be based on how the setback for that each individual lot based on its zoning designation is measured. And there's definitions in the PDO, and there's definitions on how cul-de-sac lots are measured differently. And Kathy's covered how we're going to measure where, if a flag lot is present, how we're going to apply that standard there. I think saying linear footage, I think we can play with that a little bit, because it might not come out where it's very linear at all. But in how we determine the setbacks and how we define them, especially on cul-de-sac lots, it is described as basically as a straight line from the point measured back from the curve of the right-of-way.
To the building envelope or to the
Yes.
actual building itself?
Building envelope.
Okay, the way we have it written now, it's measured to the end of the setback depth. So do you want it to go to the front of the building? We should define it that way if we want it that way.
I think, my
I
understanding is
thought
we've
we're-
always kept it to however the setback is measured for
Oh,
the
setback,
building
okay.
envelope. Mhm.
And I was
Unless,
incorrect. I was incorrect when I said the right-of-way line. I was measuring it in my mind, but it is the building envelope, so it'd be the width of that building envelope.
and the intent is that not to prohibit a property owner from being able to build, and therefore whatever trees need to be removed. Anything that's kind of in the building envelope at this point would be fair game to go away based on construction or.
Clearly, yeah. But I just think I was a little confused how we're going to calculate it, because it said irregular shaped lots, and as I look around the village, there's a lot of irregular shaped lots. In fact, it seems to be more the norm than the exception, so I think some clarity there would be useful. Or maybe examples, usually the pictorial examples are usually very great in these type of things, if you can do it.
And we have some that we can go over. And I think but the general idea is that we're utilizing the created building envelope. And we know that every lot, whether it's odd shaped or not, has some type of building envelope. And that can be calculated. Now, sometimes they do get tricky because, and we'll get surveyors ask us, well, where's this yard? Where's that yard? So some of the odd shaped ones, yeah, they'll be in the same spot, but for the more, the more square and rectangular lots, it shouldn't be a problem to calculate that building envelope. And I think, just bear with us in a minute, we'll go over some of the diagrams.
Okay.
That should help.
And well, just while we're on it, Jack, if you'll see in front of you the smaller survey, not the one that's printed on letter size here, yes, that one. If you'll see the right-of-way here, that front line on that property, it's right there where it's kind of marked at the elevation of 101. You'll see a note there that says C1. And if you go to the curve table here that the surveyor's prepared, that length is 110.3, so we would use that as the measurement. So that divided by 15 as it currently says, and that's how we would come at that number.
Right. The length of the arc.
Yes.
Right. Now, what if this was upside down? What if the road was on the back of this lot? I mean,
It would be 35 feet is the measurement as is shown there. So
Okay.
if that were the front, that would be 35.
So they wouldn't need very much. And if that were the front, it would be one tree in the front, or two, depending on what number you pick.
didn't mean to stump you. This wasn't my idea, but
And we've provided, and Jack, we know this is your first time sitting here at the table, so to speak, but we've had illustrations that we've
okay.
shared before, so.
Oh, I'm sure that's the
We
case.
failed you in that respect.
Okay, I just think clarity in how to calculate the dimensions would be.
And it would be helpful, I think, if we add a couple of more diagrams in that use an atypical type of layout. So that way they'd have a couple of ways they could look at examples.
I have a question on tear downs. If there's a tear down, does that precipitate the tree ordinance?
Sorry,
We're running numbers
we're running numbers. Yeah.
where you didn't smell. I'm sorry, so what was the question?
If there's a tear down, does that suddenly create a lot for a new calculation of the trees required?
Feel like a demolition of an existing.
Yes, right.
Yes.
It does, because it meets the definition of development.
Keep them coming, Jack.
And that's not to say we can't build exemptions into some of these things or some exclusions. We're just starting out with, with the general overall requirement, and we can always back out certain things if we see that there's a need to do that.
Do we consider or give credit for street trees?
We've been round and round and round about that too.
We require them in many cases, obviously.
In non-residential development and in subdivisions, yes, we require street trees at a rate of 1 per 40 linear feet.
Right.
So if you're talking about a new lot and a new subdivision where there's going to be 1 tree per 40 linear feet to be planted in the right-of-way, so therefore, if the right-of-way is going to be dedicated to the village for public ownership and maintenance, then they would inherently become our trees and we would have say-so over it. But then if you add that on top of that, a requirement of 1 per 15, it might come as a bit restrictive, and maybe we were creating some unintended consequences there. We've talked about that. We've talked about allowance for the planting inside the right-of-way for the required front trees. But if we give them credit for the street trees, and we're kind of giving them an out,
Yeah, that's,
because it's ours. We definitely welcome discussion with the board if you want to, but ultimately we decided to stay silent on that and not give them credit for that, or to, at this point, allow them to plant within the right-of-way to meet their planting requirements based on site constraints or to avoid driveway or utility conflicts, and then plant them in our right-of-way. And we really haven't opened that up as a very broad conversation with our Public Services Department either to see how favorable and non-favorable they would be to that.
It's not their favorite thing to work around trees.
I understand that. And the calculation of the number of trees per linear feet, I mean, it's, let's say it's like I sent you the example, what if it's a 99-foot lineal feet? Does that require 3 trees or 3.8 or, 4.8 or what is is it just a partial number? Every 20 feet or full 20 feet or something to that effect? Or 15 feet?
Kathy, I've seen it done always. Yes, where we've just, if you trigger, you can't plant a 20% of a tree. So once you hit, if this is 22.3, then you're planting 23.
It's rarely going to be an exact divisible number.
Never,
Right.
it will hardly ever be that, no.
And normally, I think we would go down unless we specifically want to round up.
Then we would have to probably build that language.
Recommend rounding up, but
So that's what would be your choice.
I would say it's got to be a full,
have to.
whatever the number
Full
is,
number.
15 feet or something to that effect.
Okay.
If it turns out it's 16 feet, it's 1 tree. If it's 30 feet, it's 2 trees. If it's 29 feet, it's 1 tree, something to that effect.
And we think that, and we can build that in, would it be a consensus with
And
everybody?
I'm just speculating here, that's
No,
all.
it's perfect. What's the other views on that particular issue? Because that's something we could change straight off. I don't think we put that in there.
Want to repeat the question for everybody?
So if your tree calculation worked out to be, you would have to provide 4.5 trees per lot. Do you want to go with the whole number and they would just provide 4, or would you want them to round up to the next highest number and provide 5?
Just poll the board. You have a preference?
5.
Jack, do you have a preference? Philip?
Well, I've expressed mine, but I don't know what everyone else is thinking, so.
So let's go like 4.95.
Okay, 4.95 is a good
So
one.
is that the 5 currently the way it's written, or is it a 4? Is that what this is?
I would call it a 4.
Okay, so it's got to hit the whole number for it to qualify for the whole number is basically the
The fractions don't count, in
fractions
other
don't
words.
count. Okay.
Yeah, I go with the 4 if it's 4.95, but
I agree, it's got to hit the whole number, is my feeling.
I agree, I like the whole number.
Yeah, helps with clarity.
Julia? I think I will.
I agree, a whole number is just, it's clearer, we aren't getting into the intricacies of measurement, and I believe that's how garden stores and landscaping stores tend to sell them. I could be wrong there, but whatever's easiest for our applicants, I think is how we should go.
Sonia?
Round down home. Did Sonia?
Sonia?
I agree with the 5.
Okay. Consensus that whole numbers.
Right.
Okay. Right. Well, if we're in the mood for consensus, do we want to decide 15 versus 20 feet and tackle those hard numbers? And I think maybe getting back to the concept of if you're looking at a new subdivision and they're going to have to provide street trees anyway, and you don't give them credit for the street trees, then maybe going to a slightly wider spacing, like going 1 to 20 feet on the front might be fine because you're already getting potentially another tree there anyway.
If we can just go around and see, we got 15, if you're 15, 20, or heaven forbid another number at this point. We can just, we can start, let's start with Sonia this time if we could.
Okay. Sonia, well, you get to go first.
I always get to go first. I think the 15 to 20 would be fine.
We're trying to decide between 15 or 20.
I'm sorry. If they have trees on the street, I think we could probably go with the 20 because it might look too crowded.
Okay. Julia?
I don't have a strong opinion either way. I think it really varies on lot size, which is going to be easier, or not easier, which is more accommodating for the builder. and what is more aesthetically appropriate. So I don't have a strong feeling one way or the other.
David?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. It's going to depend on the specific situation as far as what's more appropriate. If one of those numbers is more applicable across the board to set a standard, then, you know, that would be the one, but I can't say which would be, what that number should be.
Joel? Well, the front yard, considering the driveways, if you have a circle drive and if in mailboxes and utilities and things like that, I think the 20 feet in the front yard is probably, would cause less problems or interruptions. Jeremy?
I like the idea of the 15 feet. But I think we do have to have the major consideration for the driveways, which could make that more difficult.
Philip?
20.
2 weeks for that.
Jack?
Yeah, I felt that 15 was a little dense. However, if you're going to give credit for driveway or pathways or, you know, some type of, then I'd be okay with the 15. But if you're not going to give credit for driveways or pathways, then I think 20 is a more appropriate number. And then we didn't really discuss credit for driveways yet.
No,
That's a real issue, you know, clearly. And maybe you don't want trees that close to a driveway anyway, to be honest with you. So in the front, all in all, I think 20 is a more logical number.
Does that answer your question?
it's helpful.
That's a real answer, didn't you?
Do you want any more discussion?
I mean, we have run out several scenarios with 1 to 15, and if we allow the grouping and we allow for some of the credits that are out there, we think the 1 to 15 is doable. But the 1 to 20 is certainly doable. So, and we're going to go over a couple. Which example you want to go over with them for right now? You want to go over this one? Okay. Let's go over a quick example. Yeah, let's do the one over, what is that, in 7? Yeah. On Braemar?
Kelly bringing it up for us?
Kelly's going to bring it up on the screen too, but it's the larger tree survey there. This is Darren's favorite example. So we're going to let him.
No. Is it up? Oh, it's up. So if you take a look at this particular example, this is an example of a new house that has, that, you know, when we start to talk about the credit, if you look at the driveway that was proposed on this particular site, you can see it's a circular driveway. So you can see, what you can do is you can see the trees that were taken out on this site to put the driveway in. And what will start to happen is if we have to figure out what is that calculation for the amount of trees that would be in that front yard area, if we are providing some type of credit for the driveway. So you see that circular drive, so you've got two, what is that, potentially 20-foot wide driveway areas or connections to the road, and then how do we treat that circular driveway that is actually, you know, has a presence in that front yard area? Do we then take that out of the calculation of that front yard situation? So our simplistic idea was we're still just taking that front yard calculation. You have a certain number of trees that you have to have planted. We're going to make sure that you have that. You can do it in groupings, and then we'll give you a credit for, not a credit, but there's no more than 30 feet at your farthest point between trees, and I think that's our proposal. But these are the kind of situations that if you exempt driveways, we have to come up with some real tight language to deal with situations like this. So, and that's why we're here to talk about, you know, what you think.
That's a good, interesting example. My logic would be to limit the driveway credit to a maximum of 20 feet. But I'm also concerned about grouping. And the reason I say that is I have a property that's maybe 75 trees on it. And we had the Forest Service come in fact, in the entire development a few years ago, and they advised us that we had way too many trees, that they were too close together, and they weren't healthy for that very reason. And in fact, having particularly pines close together, they can really create an unhealthy atmosphere for all of them. So asking to be grouped may sound good when they're young and they may look okay, but over time, it's not really a good thing for the trees. So I caution against forcing grouping of a particular species in particular.
We're not forcing the grouping.
Oh, I understand. Yeah. You're allowing it as an option. I
We're
understand.
allowing it as an option.
I
So
understand.
pull out the other diagram, and this gets into, and we'll go back to that, but if you're talking about grouping, if you look at the one over on Wheeling Drive, that one, I think the numbers on the front are relatively close, close to the requirement for the required numbers in that front street yard. So ignore the driveway there for a second, but if you allow grouping, this would be the type of grouping situation, if we build that language into the code, would allow. So you see that kind of that heavy grouping on the west part of that site, on the west part of that site, and then there's 2 trees on the eastern part. I think when we did the measurements, that those would fit into the 30-foot grouping. So the way they have it here, this would be something that would be permitted under the code, right, or under this proposal, right, Kathy?
Right, but where we run into a problem here is because they put that driveway right where you have the biggest concentration of trees. So I think the first conversation that would take place on the permitting side would be, thank you for submitting your application. Have you thought about flipping this house to avoid having to replant trees? Because when you take these out, you're going to have to put them back. And so I think that's where you get back into the education side of things. They may still say, we want these trees to come out, we want the driveway on this side, this is what the owner wants, end of discussion. Then we say, thank you very much, here's what your tree ratio is, where are you going to put them? I mean, that's kind of the reality of it. But otherwise, I mean, this is a perfect example of how you could group and space. And by putting that one in that 30-foot range, or 35, whichever number we pick, that gives you something that has a chance to kind of fill out and provide a bit of some buffering and shading.
And on this particular one that we're talking about on Wheeling Drive, they have a couple, as of right now, a couple 14-inch trees in there, so they could get some credit for the required plantings based on those 14-inch trees that are in place there.
If they were preserved.
They're preserved. So, but let's circle back to the circular drive issue, and Jack had raised a point, and I think we had talked about this amongst ourselves this morning. If we give you one credit for one standard-sized drive, we could build that into the code. That way you get credit for that, so you're taking off one potential tree, depending on the ratio that we use. So you see the dilemma that we had with some of these circular driveways. If we count the whole driveway, you're going to lose a lot of that linear footage of trees in there if we take that out. Plus, it's going to make it more difficult for us to actually run a calc on that driveway. It's just, we can give you credit for one driveway, and I think that's a more doable thing from a code perspective.
Yeah, so I guess if we built consensus and went for a front requirement of 1 per 20 linear feet, and then we gave a credit of driveway width, subtracting from that required area of up to 20 feet, then it's basically, you get a free tree, or, you don't have to meet one tree requirement. Is that, it's one tree, but based on the placement or ability for placement on a lot, it could mean the difference in preserving a tree or one being stuck somewhere.
So you're saying the credit for a driveway would be 20 feet?
I'm just throwing out there what
That's a
Jack
standard
threw out
drive.
there.
Yeah.
That's sort of a standard. So then,
So if you wanted, that wouldn't prohibit someone from, like the previous survey here, from having a large circular drive, but just, you're going to be known that you're only going to be able to take away up to 20 feet, up to 20 feet max, and the rest of it, you're still going to have to try to preserve or try to meet the planning requirement.
At 20 feet's a pretty wide driveway. I mean, that's kind of the max. I mean, most driveways are in the, what, 10
10 to 12.
10 feet range,
Yeah,
usually
the 20's
width-wise.
fire truck access, so
Yeah,
yeah.
right. Maybe 20 is a little bit too generous a credit, but some credit.
But if you're at
All right.
15 and then you go 20, that's 35. I mean, you have 15 between each tree, and then you have a 20-foot, so it could be.
I think Alex was just stating, if we raise the ratio up to 1 to 20, then you're essentially building in a driveway credit.
Right. That's true. Now, in the case of a corner lot where the driveway comes in off of a road, it wouldn't make any difference because you're considering any street fronting property as front lot, right?
Yep, and one of the purposes behind the proposal is to try and maintain that tree line corridor that we have in this community. So that was, if you look at the purpose and intent, this ordinance ties strongly back to
Right.
maintaining that character. And it's also a buffer from some of the activity that's happening in the street, the traffic, the people, it is having somewhat of it will have a buffer effect.
Okay, so I'm kind of leaning towards 15 now that you remind me about the street trees and.
I think the conversation from an applicant is going to come up possibly each and every time until they get educated. What do I do with my driveway? Okay, I see your requirement. What am I going to do with my driveway? And I think that some clarity behind a driveway credit could help with that.
So we can just include language for it. Mm-hmm.
Include the language, and I think it would help up front with some explanation from the staff to the applicant.
I think you should pick one, and then if you get a whole bunch of flack, then we can change it. We can modify it.
The ordinance is living, so ordinance is living, it can always be adjusted.
Yeah, the
Okay.
intent of having all this feedback now is not for staff to kind of be creating this in some sort of a vacuum, and then we go to a public hearing and you guys just throw everything back at us. The public hearing is going to be to get feedback and solicit feedback mainly on the public. So we've been plugging and playing with these numbers all along. So at this point, I, unlike Darren, you guys just tell me a number. I'm putting it down. Darren's dug in on his 15.
Who's going to speak first?
Are you asking for a vote 15 with a credit or 20 with no credit? Is that what you're asking?
That could work.
A
vote wouldn't be
I'm
bad.
kind of liking the credit 20 feet too. I think that gives some
20.
flexibility to not necessarily terribly limit or prohibit someone from being able to have more driveway area. And I think that's something that staff can administer fairly objectively and easily, although some of my colleagues would say.
The reason they came up with 20 feet as a driveway credit was a 10-foot driveway, plus you don't want a tree closer than 5 feet on each side. So, you really wouldn't probably. So that's where I ended up with 20 feet.
Well, if we could maybe get a vote on the 15 or 20, and then on the driveway credit,
Okay?
if that's possible.
Yeah, that's possible. So you want
We're gonna go around again on the.
15 with a driveway credit, or 20 with a driveway credit, or just 15 feet or 20 feet, no credit?
I think it could be as simple as driveway credit
Okay.
and 15 or 20.
Was he telling us 15 or 20? Was I supposed to read between those lines, those thumbs?
Darren was prompting him.
Okay, who wants to go first? Jack, you want to go first this time?
I go with, we're going with the 15 or 20 first? Or are we
15 or
going to both
20.
of them? You want both of them?
And then whether you want the driveway credit or
Oh,
no
okay.
credit.
I would go with 20 feet and a driveway credit.
Same.
15 feet in a driveway credit.
15 feet in a driveway credit. Joel, 15 feet in a driveway credit?
Yeah, I like 15 and a driveway credit.
Sonia?
15 in a driveway credit.
Julia?
I'm on board with 15 feet and a driveway credit.
All right, that seems to be the consensus, 15 in driveway credit, so we'll put that.
Okay, do we need to,
All right, we
do you
got
want
that.
to do the diameter of trees for 1 and 1 credit? Or is that pretty much set at 16 inches?
I think
That
that
would be a
was,
good one to have another number, you know, if somebody feels differently, wants to go 12 inches or a different number, I think it would be good to know that.
And Jack, I think you had raised, you know, you talked a little bit about, you know, the driveway or the credit and 16 being, did you think 16 was too large to provide? That was our minimum size for credit, and
I think that is a little big for credit. You know, 16, you aren't the, if I had a 12-inch tree, I mean, depending on the variety, but if I had a 12-inch tree on my property, I would consider that a very, very mature tree. And probably, it's probably going to be pretty tall, too, as a matter of fact. So I think 12 inches is, to me at least, that's a pretty substantial tree.
I would assume it has more of a useful life left. I don't know much about the lifespan of trees, but a 12-inch tree would probably have a little bit,
You know.
bit more.
Well, I mean, they can, as weird as it seems, they can go to 3 feet and 150 feet tall, but that, you're talking about really, really mature longleaf pine, and we don't always see a lot of those.
I think if, go ahead. I was gonna say, I think if we allow credits almost as low as we can for diameter, we may entice more keeping of some trees and help with the preservation of this. You know, we think of a 6-inch tree. Again, you think I like 6-inch trees, right? I keep going back to that number, right? So in my mind, certainly a 6-inch tree's got a lot of growth, right, before it hits a 12, 16. About the point of how healthy is a 12-inch tree or a 16-inch tree. So if we could entice someone clearing a lot of builder to keep that 6-inch tree or 4-inch tree or 8-inch tree, I think that helps with accomplishing maybe what we're trying to get to, which is the preservation, and we don't have to wait as long for that 2-inch tree that may get planted in its place to grow.
I think that's an excellent point. Yeah, you're right.
well, I think we can say we can give you credit given for existing healthy trees at a minimum of 6-inch DBH. And then whatever we want to explore at whatever, if we say from anything from 12 inches or greater, is that 2, and for an extra tree at every 4 inches like we had discussed? So saying a 16-inch tree will give you credit for 3? I'm kind of liking, if we go that route, I think I might be moving over to the 1 per 15. Because we just maybe, you know, you can keep 2 trees and that, you keep 2 16-inch trees in your front, and you may have hit your requirement.
Well, I mean,
What we're trying to do.
a lot with a large tree, you know, an old, with a large canopy is beautiful, and you really don't need a lot of other trees in the yard. There's not room for a lot of other trees in the yard. So, you know, when you, 16 inches and above, every 4 inches of free, and a credit, I'm okay with that.
And then we'll start at 6.
Is that the general consensus, is 6, and then we start giving, well, Philip, we know where you are. So is that the general consensus, is that we start at 6 and we'll add in credits the larger you get? Is that the general flavor?
I think, my opinion is 6-inch for 1 credit, and then if you start at 16, if you have one that's 16 inches, it's 2 credits, and then maybe go up.
Oh, so
from
you've
there.
really jumped, so it's not from 6, like, Alex, what were you
Going
at?
to go 6 to 12.
Yeah, I think
And
some of
then-
the discussion was over, maybe allowing for a 12-inch, because 16 inches.
Well, if you do 1 for 1 for everything that's 6 inches or above, and then 2 for 16 or above, or something like that.
That's what I had sent you all, like a scale, where it was like 8 to 10 inches, you get the 1 for 1, I think, and then between greater than 10, less than 12 equals 2 for 1, or.
Okay.
Are we working with 16 and 12 just because they're nice round numbers?
Yes.
Because, I mean, looking at the big lot, you know, there's only a handful that are 16 or above. The majority are, you know, right at 14. 14's the sweet spot. On the smaller lot, there are, I think, none that are 16 and above, but, you know, there's some at 12, but 14, just looking at these two maps seems to be a sweeter number if we're talking about trees that actually fit that mold. I don't know if
But
that,
David's gonna meet you in the middle between 12 and 16, say
Go
14.
with 14.
just from what I'm seeing here, I don't know if that is applicable, you know, if that could be carried out at all, but
There again, it does vary based on the species too. I mean, because you'll see
Yeah.
there's some 10-inch hardwoods here that are shown on this smaller,
Got a
lot
huge
tree
one
survey.
on the other.
And they're still going to get 1-for-1 on all of these, right?
At a minimum of, yeah, if it's at least 6 inches, what we're talking about now, you're going to get credit for one tree.
If you do 14, they're going to get a lot of credits. On
Be
this-
getting 2 for each one of those, yeah.
Yeah.
But then they can, then they'd be able to keep their driveway here
Yeah,
and mow all those
let
trees.
let us run through, let us run through some calculations on that to see what that actually does on these couple lots before we come back. Let's circle back to that, but with the knowledge that we're gonna run some calcs and see what the actual effect of that is on some of these lots.
And we'll
I was
give
gonna
that
say-
6-inch DBH credit, starting at 6 inch.
I was going to say, going to 6-inch may accomplish the, you know, something that we desire as a result, but it's going to add to your calculation time. There with your calculator, so for sure.
Well, we just don't wanna blunt the intent, the intent of what we're trying to do here, which is maintain that urban, the forest that we have, that canopy. So let us run some numbers to see what the true impact of that would be with some of the conversation that we just had.
Right, and I did think the other advantage of going down to a 6 is that it would give us a bigger mix of tree ages. So you wouldn't be losing everything at the same time. You know, you'd have kind of things coming and going and growing at different levels. So,
You could have a 6, a 14, a 12. You could end up planting a 3.
Then we might be wanting to go down to 1 to 10 foot spacing.
In the parking lot.
Kathy, is there anything else that you want a decision on?
Let's see, what else did I have numbers on? Oh, yeah, I did have one question on I think there was an initial indication that people were fond of a ratio of 2 to 1 for inches removed in violation. But I also heard people were okay with 2 trees for every tree removed. So I didn't know if we wanted to stick with the 2. Let's see, how do we have it in here? Let me just read it. When trees of 8 inches DBH or greater have been removed in violation, replacement trees shall be planted in the same general area according to a replacement schedule approved by the village planner in a ratio not to exceed 2 to 1 of 2 inches of caliper per inch removed. So that's the way we have it right now, but I did put that other option in, or 2 trees for every tree removed if you wanted to go that path.
Okay.
If you want to be probably the most punitive possible, you might want to stick with the 2 to 1 for inches removed.
Does anyone have an opinion or a comment on that?
For my thinking, could we discuss that in terms of a subdivision plan review and what that would possibly mean? You know, at what point would it be considered a violation of a removal, and then how, then would the 2-for-1 still come into play, or would that be different, or would you help me understand that part?
Okay, so, and this might be a Alex-Kathy conversation. So somebody comes in and they've indicated they're going to get a subdivision approval. They've started through the process, but in the meantime, they go ahead on out there and they clear. So in that case, we're going to go out and look and say, you know, what's left, forensically, what's left out there. And if we measure the base and we see how many inches that base would be, it's actually punitive because the bases are usually, bigger. But we measure what we have out there. For every 2 inches that we can tell that they removed, then they're going to put 1 back. For every 2 inches, they're going to replace. I'm not getting that right. I just said that backwards, didn't I? They're going to replace 2 for every inch. There we go. I did get it backwards. So it's not just a tree. They're going to be replacing multiple trees or multiple inches in size on a tree.
Point of during our subdivision review that we talked about with them going on the outsides of each lots. Is that right? So I guess the gray area that I'm thinking in my head is, at what point during the transition of ownership or who pulls the permits, does the owner clear the land and then sell it to a developer? And would that trigger a violation on if it was cleared when they purchased it? And would that cause some people to say, hey, clear the land and I'll buy it from you, or pretty much during the.
That's a really good question, because you should still, even if you're not doing a subdivision, you should still have a clearing and grading permit.
And that's in absence of an active application for development in the ordinance. Like-
Absence of an application.
Yeah, so if there's a major subdivision review, right now, as the language is, then a clearing and grading permit would not apply, knowing that these development restrictions are going to apply to the single-family lots. Now, our subdivision regulations are a whole nother ball of wax. We need to.
Okay.
We're
Yeah,
trying to grab some.
I didn't mean to open that can yet, but I thought it was important.
You didn't.
for the thing.
Yeah,
That's
we left-
very, very good
Well,
comments.
Because at what point, if I'm the owner of the land, am I allowed to go cut my tree down or not cut my tree down? And that's where I think we get into violating without a permit, an active thing, and then the land gets sold. Where are we?
See, I think there is a potential for a violation to be triggered anywhere along that path. And this is maybe one of the tough decisions that has to be addressed, because if you remove a tree, does that require a clearing and grading permit? And if it's a tree that you've not been permitted in some way, shape, or form to remove because you haven't had a tree survey done, or it doesn't meet one of the exemptions, then you would have to come in and pull a permit to remove that tree.
Oh, boy, this sounds like a real firestorm. I mean, I've taken 25 trees out of my lot. I mean, didn't realize I was in violation here, but
But if you
it's very
don't,
common to have someone come in and take a tree out. You know, it's too close to the house, or it's, diseased, or you name it.
and diseased is fine. Disease would be exempt in a situation like that. If you've got a situation where you need to take it down, then you don't have to get a permit, because it truly would be exempt. So that's where it gets kind of complicated. You know, where do you pull the trigger on that one?
And this
In the
is,
historic district, it's pretty straightforward, but,
Right, we'll bounce it right on over, and it'll go through the Historic Preservation
Right.
District standards. Mhm.
Well, I can't imagine telling the population, we're going to now from here on demand an application to take any tree down on your property.
and this is where staff got stuck when we were meeting Tuesday. We had talked and we were trying to provide some feedback. When does this get triggered? And so, if someone is just to remove a single tree on their lot, does it rise to the level of having to submit an application, go get a tree survey? What point is it where the village planner can just visit the site and determine that, hey, you're compliant, you don't need to get a tree survey, you can take it down, here's your permit? Or do you even need to get a permit for this? So is a clearing and grading permit, does that trigger because you're proposing to remove a tree that would be in one of these protected yards? So then we would have to have some sort of submitted material to us to determine that even if you do remove that tree, you still meet these standards? Or if you want to remove that tree, you're light on your number, so you're going to have to then plant a 3-inch caliper somewhere else along that same protected yard. And the historic district standards now, it's basically removal of a tree in the street front is what the criteria you use, that you'll need some sort of approval.
Right.
But we've,
Yeah, so it's been kind of tough, and, one of the things that I thought about too was, we could exempt any trees within the building footprint of a lot. So that would, that way we only look at those perimeter yards as one way to tackle it, so then they wouldn't come in if it were within that building footprint. So as long as it's not in the setbacks, we don't care. We could go as far as to say, as long as it's not a required tree. So if you don't need that tree to meet your numbers, you can take it down. It does become a monitoring nightmare. I mean, that is really true. Mm-hmm. So those are the tough calls.
And I guess the issue is, if we don't have some type of review at the administrative level, how do we ensure that the canopy is preserved? So that's where we've struggled with this clearing and grading permit. What is the actual trigger? And Alex, and we've been talking about that actively this week, and I think that's still a question that we need to resolve. Do we say it's just in these the required buffer areas? We don't have we don't. I think that's something we need to come to a resolution on.
And is the point now, I'm thinking this through more, is a clearing and grading permit, really from the public comments that we've heard at the village council level, we've heard at this board level when we had these public hearings, is when there's a vacant lot and it's totally denuded of all landscaping on site, either at the time or prior to development on that lot. So maybe we just apply this to vacant lots. A clearing and grading permit is triggered when there is no active subdivision, site plan approval, or anything, and the lot is currently vacant. So, but then you get to the point where David comes in tomorrow, applies for his new single-family residence to allow for, he needs a larger home now because he's got the kid at home. And he shows that the landscaping requirement and all, he meets all these requirements, the 1 per 15 feet. He's got his one little 12-foot driveway. He's good to go. His trees are up. We close out the permit. And then a year later, since it's not a vacant property anymore, can he just start taking out trees when he wants to? And then I know now we currently have that maintenance responsibility
language.
clause in there. So basically then we're going to be exempting, which isn't out, I mean, we're pretty much everyone else who has a current establishment or single-family lot in the village is going to be grandfathered in. So Jack, you can.
Yeah, well, we're back to micromanaging people's lives on a day-to-day basis, and I don't think we want to get into that.
Yeah, I'm kind of, this is my lot, and this is my home, and this is my property, and, if I don't like cleaning up pine needles, which is, I had a neighbor like that, and he left the trees on the perimeter, but he took down the trees around the house because he didn't want to, and I think when you're around if you're not in the setback area, I think, homeowners should have control of that, because usually if they're taking them down, it's having an effect on their home.
I do like Alex's thought of undeveloped lots it applies to. I'm concerned, for example, the clear cutting definition you got, the process of removing some or all of the tree. Some, I mean, 2 out of 500 is some. I mean, I think a majority or something to that effect might be a little more appropriate as far as that definition goes. But I think applying it to undeveloped property makes the most sense. Once you're got a developed house and a property and so forth, then you're trying to micromanage their day-to-day lives if you tell them they can't take a tree down or something like that.
And if you're demolishing a building and rebuilding, I think that should fall under it as well.
Well, a tear down, that triggers a new development though, doesn't it? It becomes undeveloped when you tear it down?
Go to rebuild it.
Well, demolition is a development activity.
Oh, that's true.
Well, let's take any example. I mean, the house on Linden Road that was torn down and a new one put up there. It's in the historic district, on the left side as you go out. It was completely demolished. Would that have triggered a new tree requirement there?
Yes.
As is currently
As it's
written,
written.
yes.
Mhm.
Wait, this is.
Our current ordinances would require the 4, wouldn't it?
Oh, no, he's saying just not the redevelopment.
Oh, okay.
Just the plain
Okay.
development.
No, I got
Just
you.
the demolition
Yep,
would.
yep.
Okay, Joel just told me that he has to leave in 5 minutes, so if we need anything more from him, you got 5 minutes.
And I know Julia had spoken with me earlier this week. I know she has somewhere else to be soon as well.
But this is good to get this done, so what else do you need from us?
I
Well,
think
I think
staff
we-
needs to work on that.
Well, I think we need to circle back to this clearing and grading permit and when we're applying this ordinance, and how it's applied to existing developed situations. And I think we need to think through that a little bit more, because the way it's written right now, it applies to all properties.
I would suggest or lead towards as well the definition of undeveloped lots or undeveloped properties. And I think we just got to accept that a homeowner can take their trees down. And and understand that that's a possibility, and do we even want to tell someone what to do with their personal property, or can we? I think that's one of the questions I've got is, can we? And do we want to open up something that could be viewed or at some point in time defined as a legal situation from a decision that we made here today? So I think we've got to, I would suggest that we put it directly towards undeveloped lands or lots. Just my thoughts.
Yeah, I think
Otherwise, it's a little bit of an overreach, I think.
when people consider their lots, they rarely consider whether they're acting in the setback or not, unless they're doing some sort of major work, which, you know, depending on the size of the tree, it might be, but it's just something that they likely wouldn't even consider.
That's why I also like the 15-foot, go back to that, because then again, it equates 4 or 5 years down the road for someone taking something out or something happening to an area.
So we can revise when a clearing and grading permit would be triggered, and that would be removal on vacant land. Keep the ratios that we have in for those standards, keep the ratios we have in for the single-family development, and then after occupying of single-family development, we'll just take the,
Remove the
to
maintenance
keep,
language.
just hope that they'll stay there for, and to some sort of extent down the line.
Well, right, I mean, by doing something like that, you're taking out some of the intent or that we have behind the ordinance, which is to preserve preserve that wooded character that we have. So if we're only applying it to the undeveloped properties, which is probably in the community right now, that's the lesser amount of lots that we have in development. All the rest, you could potentially take down, and it's not going to happen, but you could potentially take down all the trees in the front yard areas, and the side yard areas, and the rear yard areas. And that's a potentiality, with the exception of anything that was developed under this current ordinance, where we do have a minimum planting requirement of 4 to 8 trees in some of the lots. So just be cognizant of that.
And we're not, I mean, even administering that 5, 7 years after the permit's closed out too is,
There's not a requirement to maintain, well,
But going back to Joel's point earlier, actually, which is, I think most people in this community want the community to be a certain way, and we have to rely upon their good faith and character to maintain it. I mean, to try to manage it beyond that is a little bit of an overreach.
And I'd also like to bring up what Jack brought up, the clear-cutting definition. Is that from general statute of the state, or is that our definition? Because
I'm trying to remember where we took it from. We did take it from something.
yeah, it just seems removing some or all of the trees. I mean, I believe clear-cutting to be all.
Majority, at a minimum, not the majority, right?
What I'm pulling up here, I was trying to find general statute, but I couldn't, but some is a little ambiguous.
Yeah, the reason I think it includes some is, say somebody comes in and they strip out all their trees in their front yard. That's clear cutting of some of the trees, but it's clear cutting the trees you don't want them stripping out. So, for the purpose of the definition, I don't know, if it's very meaningful that way. I mean, because really the intent is if you come out and you start clearing areas out, then, we want to be able to slow you down and say, time out here. Let's have a conversation about what you're about to do. We could avoid the use of the word clear cutting maybe altogether. That's something we can look at. We can actually delete that definition.
if it doesn't apply to any of the other language that we're needing to administer this part of the ordinance as it needed.
yeah, I'm
I
not
don't
sure if there's
recall
any
it
way.
being anywhere else, yeah.
Yeah, because I think maybe it shows up maybe one place, and I think if we start playing with this language a little bit, we might not need it. So if that's the case, we'll take it out.
Wasn't
avoid using it
wasn't the
altogether.
only interest in keeping it in was that it triggers a requirement for a permit,
Clearing and grading permit?
clear and grading permit?
But if we stick with the words tree removal, under certain circumstances, specify what those circumstances are, that's enough to probably do a clearing and grading permit too. So I think we could get rid of the word clear cutting altogether.
I mean, we do pick up the word clearing in our definition of development, and the definition of development is taken from the
That
statutes.
one's, yeah, that is.
That is a very, very important definition and term to have.
Yes, that's a future requirement. That's really a current requirement now.
I think you're incredibly close.
We're not there yet.
Getting across the finish line, that's the hard part.
On right within the last 100 yards, so, yeah. That's-
It's the case every month.
Or someone's going to ask the question was, what's the definition of a tree?
Oh,
There are definitions. I mean, it's a
Vascular
Webster's
plant.
dictionary.
Yeah, and in absence of a definition in local development ordinances, case law has come out and said that you go to Webster's dictionary for a determination, and we get to make those determinations, and if they don't like it, then there's an avenue for that, and it's right before you guys.
Okay, that's a good
All
answer.
right, all right, let
Board
us,
of Adjustment hat.
I think we've got some good I think the one other question that I had was regarding the types of trees that were, what we were proposing, the species that we're trying to plant back or propose to plant back, and that was we had 50% have to be, longleaf? And then we also had, dogwood, American holly, southern magnolia, eastern red cedar, those types of species. There was another request that maybe we allow for hemlock to be included in that mix. And so I'm gonna bring it up, and what are people's thoughts generally on hemlock? If we include that as one of the trees that we require you to plant back.
And I was on the other side of the hemlock issue because it's not a tree that's native to this part of North Carolina. Western part, yes, not so much here.
Yeah, that's what I just, and I now know that I have some in my yard.
I kind of like the idea of referring to the list that's.
The tall tree list.
Yeah, that's. in-
That does give a greater latitude for, just say it's got to be either a small or tall tree listed, or do we want to just say with tall tree?
Well, if we
I'd have to
just,
look
if
at
we
it.
just make the reference to the appendix, I think we can do that.
And are they
I
native?
know
it's
there's some
C,
in
isn't
here
it?
I've gotten some feedback from that we should not.
Or
Oh,
we
they
can
don't
just
want
say-
us to do that?
Or we can just say pine, longleaf pine, and leave it at that. If we want 50% of them to be longleaf pine, we could leave it at that.
And 50% can be whatever you want to plant.
In,
Native, yeah.
Native, okay. Mhm.
So half longleaf pine and half
Well-
one of these.
that's our other proposal, if you think that's a if you think that's an acceptable idea with this ordinance.
Do they have to be longleaf pines, or can they just be a pine tree? Because it is Pinehurst, so I understand that.
I
Right
think
now,
the suggestion was, from the arborist, was for longleaf.
And I'd go with longleaf, like loblolly and some others are not necessarily, those are, commercial trees planted for paper,
we're good with that, we can work with that. Anything else? All right,
I don't have anything. Anybody have anything else?
all right, we probably won't be having a public hearing in January on this, so let's,
Thought we were so close.
we'll have another discussion next month on this, but I don't think we're to that point yet, because I think there's some things that need to be squared away on clearing and grading permits when it applies. So let us go back to the drawing board on that. We're close.
Sonia, I think Sonia had something. She was waving her hand a few minutes ago.
Sonia?
Thank you. Thank you. I guess I'm hung up on hemlocks, but I want to set the record straight. I believe the Tufts did plant those hemlocks like 100 and some years ago. So when did they become native? And they are being extinct, and I think that's my concern about getting those not cut down, because you cannot even find one anywhere anymore.
Okay, so you're thinking from the historic perspective, we should allow it?
Correct.
Okay.
What, is it in the list? Is it in a list of tall?
Does everybody know what a hemlock looks like?
Yes.
Okay.
There is a hemlock forest or park in Cary that has a lot of them. Alex is looking it up.
We're not seeing it in the appendix of the PDO at this point.
I mean, we could, I mean, do you want to specifically reference Manning's list? So any species that would have been considered part of the original plantings for the village, or the tall tree list, or we can tweak the tall tree list. I mean, it's,
Are you asking me?
They're thinking.
I mean, I think that would be nice to keep the village somewhat like it was and not just have pine trees and whatever, if we can possibly keep those and not get them extinct and help.
Well, what's the general consensus on that particular issue? Allow it?
Credits for Hemlock?
Credit for hemlock?
What calculations can we do?
Yeah, I'm fine with adding it. I don't see an issue.
yeah, I think understanding that you're looking to add it because it's part of the historic character of the village, I think definitely gives it some impetus, so we'll put it in.
But to the same point here, I'm sorry to play devil's advocate here. If we're going to allow them to plant it, and to Sonia's point, if you can't find one, I about guess no one's going to be planting them.
For the free market.
Yeah,
to
but
do.
Well, maybe things will change. I mean, same thing with people cutting down all the magnolia trees because they don't like the leaves. And I can tell you, there have been a lot cut down. So are we going to just live just for Pinehurst, or are we going to try to preserve the woodsy look?
We can go woodsy.
That's why I brought it up. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. I mean,
Okay.
That's good.
if it's part of the history of Pinehurst and it was some of the original trees,
I think that's a thought. What we can
That's
do
a
is,
little different,
what we
yeah.
could do is look at that particular, what that original species list was, see what was not invasive, or look at that, talk to our arborist about it, and get another opinion from our arborist.
Yeah, what's the intent of the native species list?
We don't even have a native species
Or,
list.
or what's the intent of the list in the PDO?
It's a native species to the Sand
Most
Hills
of those
region.
are, yeah.
really?
Because if it's in conflict with that, just because it's part of the history, I think that was implemented for a reason, so I don't know.
The condition we had on Floyd Way.
Yeah, was that to be one of those lists?
I thought it was, okay.
But it's,
You know, sometimes we put those lists together because the native species thrive in their native environment. So, I mean, sometimes that's why they go on the list for that reason. And sometimes they go on the list because you're looking at the habitat values of the trees on that list, and that pushes you towards the native species. So I think a lot depends on intent.
If it's not something that would be in conflict or harmful to the environment of those species, then
Right, so,
that would be something to
with the
consider.
historical value, I think it adds to it, but
and we can talk with our staff arborists. We have a little bit more stronger feedback.
yeah, luckily we have a good resource.
admittedly ignorant in that field, so
Ditto.
somebody's got a better idea of it than I do.
Okay, so
We'll bring that back to you.
is there anything else that you'd like to discuss or address?
Yeah, that's good.
Good now.
Alex, Darren, Kathy,
I think we're good.
we're good? Okay, then our next meeting date will be January 7th, 2021. So I hope all of you have happy holidays and a happy new year, and we'll see you on January 7th. So if there's no other business, would someone like to make a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Jeremy, seconded by David. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned.